Yeah, welcome everyone who managed to join. My name's Nathan Einbinder, and I'm the program lead for regenerative food and farming at Dartington and Schumacher College. Specifically, I run the master's in regenerative food farming and enterprise, which just began its first year in January. And we'll be helping on the new bachelor's program undergrad beginning this September. And you can find all the information you need on the Schumacher Dartington website about those two courses. So tonight's talk is part of an ongoing series in a partnership we have with Chelsea Green Books called Farming for the Future, where we bring in some of the leading writers and practitioners in the field of regenerative food and farming. And the series is part of a broader program of events and courses and degrees at Dartington and at Schumacher College, where we provide training in agroecology to the next generation of farmers and food producers. And we do this by using our own growing spaces, as well as partnerships with local organizations like School Farm CSA here on the estate, as well as the Apricot Center. So you can check out all of our programs, like I mentioned, and feel free to write me personally if you have questions about any of these programs. And so before I introduce Ben Raskin, who has kindly agreed to join us for a bit of a talk about his latest book, the Woodchip Handbook, they've offered a 30% off discount for anyone joining today. And I'll put that with this code. I'm going to go ahead and see if I can put this right into the chat for everyone. Give me just one moment here. I don't know if I can do that. Give me just a moment. I'll figure it out by the end, but I do have a discount code for everyone. So yeah, huge pleasure to introduce Ben Raskin. Ben has been working in horticulture for 25 years or more, and is currently head of horticulture and agroforestry for the Soil Association, and also works on a 200-acre silvopastoral agroforestry planting in Wiltshire. And he also writes books, which fascinates me, how you could work two jobs and write amazing books, kind of back to back. A number of books on gardening, zero waste gardening, which he published just last year, the Community Gardening Handbook in 2017, and a couple of other books aimed at families with young children: Compost, Grow and Bees and Butterflies. All wonderful books that you should definitely check out. And so without further ado, I'm pleasure to introduce Ben. And maybe we'll just start with I'm curious what inspired you to write a book about wood chips. Seems kind of a niche topic. I've read the book though, and I mean, it's not that niche when you start getting into it. It can touch on many things, which is something that I really want to talk about with you. But maybe just what sparked your interest in this? What brought you to it?
Good question. And I guess, like a lot of people, I probably used wood chip quite a lot for mulching paths and not very much else, possibly some shrubs and trees. And it is great for that. But over the last probably 3 or 4 years, there was this sort of almost like a drip of the universe telling me that, this stuff was more important. So we used it a lot at Eastbrook Farm, which is the agroforestry farm you mentioned near Swindon, which is Helen Browning's farm. And we're planting a lot of trees, and we're organically certified. So even if we wanted to spray, which we don't, we wouldn't be allowed to. So controlling weeds with herbicide is not an option. And we experimented a bit with mulch mats and, you know, Hessian and plastic mulch mats, and I hate them all. So my experience there showed me how much better the trees established with wood chip, and the more I used it, the more I realized, you know, a whole range of reasons why, which, you know, I go into in the book, obviously. So that was one thing, just sort of using a lot of wood chip for mulching trees. And then we had a couple of trials that we did. So the Soil Association runs this Innovative Farmers program, which is aimed at bringing groups of farmers together to try out ideas, and we bring researchers in to help them design good trials. And we did one on using willow wood chip as a mulch on apple trees. The concept being that the salicylic acid in the willow stimulates an immune reaction in the apple trees, which makes them, it seems, more able to cope with scab. So the trees that had the willow wood chip mulch in an initial experiment had lower scab levels. And we wanted to see if we could replicate that in a commercial cider orchard situation. So we had a bunch of Somerset cider growers trial it. The trial showed a trend towards it working. It wasn't conclusive, and there's a few reasons why that might not have been. But anyway, so there was that. And then also we did another field lab with Ian Tolhurst, who I'm sure you will know, and probably others on the call will know, is an amazing grower, vegan organic grower in Berkshire, who I know very well. And he's been using wood chip for quite a long time anyway, and it's a bit of an inspiration for the book too. But we did this trial with making propagation compost from wood chips, effectively just rotting it down a bit longer than you would normally, composting it for longer and sieving it. And in that trial, the plants that we grew in the wood chip compost basically were the same as those that were grown in a commercial peat-based propagation compost. So we thought, okay, that's pretty interesting. That's something that, you know, really low tech. He basically just turns it a few times and composts it, could compete with, you know, sort of high-end commercial propagation compost. So there was that. And then there's also another grower, Fred Bonestrew, who's a biodynamic grower very near me here in North Wiltshire. And he'd been making hot boxes for propagation from wood chip. So suddenly I started thinking all of these things that wood chip is being used for. And then I was involved with a project that the Organic Research Centre were running on ramial wood chip. So the ramial, as you probably know, is this wood chip from branches that are less than 7 centimetres in diameter. And the sort of concept really is you chip them and you can use them straight away. You can add them to soil straight away. They've got higher nutrient levels than typical wood chip. So they don't cause, or in theory, we think, they don't cause problems with adding it straight to soil. So you potentially cut out that whole operation of composting and spreading and collecting. So it becomes a much more efficient way of using it. And then just the more I kind of looked into it, the more I thought, well, there's, you know, you can use it for bedding for livestock. You know, you can make biochar. You know, there's just a whole load of stuff that we didn't seem to be really harnessing, I think, as farmers. And then the final kind of eureka moment, I think, was in 2018. And we'd chipped a whole load of, we'd pollarded some big willow trees on the farm and chipped them. And threw the chip over the fence onto some trees we'd planted. And I had intended to move it and spread it around and properly mulch a whole bunch of trees. And I never got round to it. So there was a little group of trees that had about 2.5 feet of mulch, which obviously is a little bit more than the recommended dose. And if you remember, 2018 was that really hot, dry spring and summer. So we had about 3 months with no rain. And we lost a lot of trees. We lost about 40% of the trees we planted that year. But the ones that had this huge mulch on not only grew, but grew unbelievably, to the point where, you know, they're now, I was down there at the weekend, and they're possibly 16, 18 feet tall. And the ones that didn't have a mulch are just growing past my waist, you know, literally 2 meters away. And I suddenly thought, this isn't just good, this is miraculous. You know, we could really do stuff with this. So I thought, right, I've got to write a book about this. No one's written a book. You know, I had a look, and people had, you know, written articles. Lots of people had written blogs and articles, and, it seemed that a lot of people were using it, but no one had really pulled together all of this information from a range of angles. And then when I started researching, I realized actually there's quite a lot of stuff's been done on this in various forms, but it had never been pulled together. So yeah, that was the inspiration. Long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's great. Just a quick question, follow-up. So do you think that, what's your hypothesis on why those trees did so well? Is it moisture? It seems to me, I mean, I don't know that much about this topic, but I have seen other incidences during drought where if you have just a lot of coverage, whatever moisture in the soil is kind of staying there. And then the chips themselves have moisture, so it might be adding even more moisture to the soil.
I think it's moisture. I think in that instance it was mainly moisture. I think it was so dry, and willow obviously is a tree that needs a lot of moisture. We're on heavy clay, so there was actually, when we planted it, there was plenty of moisture in the soil. The trees that weren't mulched, we had some big cracks in the soil. We had cracks that went down 1 meter or 1.5 meters. So the soil was drying out in the unmulched areas, but yeah, it definitely wasn't in the mulched. There might also have been an element of temperature modulation. So the mulch will keep the soil cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter. So it might have been just allowing those roots to develop more because the soil was a bit cooler. And the other bit that you get in time is that biological stimulation and sort of soil health building that I'm sure in time had some effect. But I think the main reason for those, I think probably is mainly moisture.
Yeah. Huh, that's interesting. Well, it seems like good justification for writing a book. I mean,
well, it's not often you find a topic that no one's written about. Everyone's writing books, so finding something that's untapped was quite a surprise.
And so, in your research for the book, would you say that using wood chips for any means, for any reason at all, is that something that people have been doing for a long time and maybe just not, this hasn't been documented? Like, could this be considered maybe like an ancestral practice in Europe? Or
no, because the first wood chip was only invented in 1894 or something. Yeah. So it's a relatively recent invention, and there has been some interesting stuff. There was Jean Pain in France who in the 70s who did a lot of kind of really slightly wacky stuff where he was heating his whole house and collecting methane and powering his 2CV from it. And if you get a chance to read that book, that's quite something.
But in the book, you recommend not really messing with the methane.
Well, it's a thing. I think it's a bit.
But dangerous. Not just because it's dangerous. It's releasing a greenhouse gas.
Well, it is, but he was. I guess there's some of that being released anyway. So it depends how you. Maybe it's better to collect it, but it's if you look at some of the pictures, it's surprising that he survived. Quite honestly, I don't think he had much regard for health and safety. But equally, it's great to have that kind of those people who are willing just to test stuff. But what surprised me, I guess, was that the research that he did and the research that was done on ramial wood chip, for instance, in Canada in the 1980s, it didn't seem to have been particularly taken up or taken seriously. And I don't really know why. I think there is a fear of nitrogen robbing when using wood chip, and there's definitely a sort of school of thought that says don't put wood chip on soil, it's gonna you're gonna have problems. And it's sort of a little bit ingrained. It's definitely one of the questions that comes up almost every time I talk about it. And there is a risk. It's not that you can't have problems, but
what kind of problems would you expect to?
So basically, what most wood chip is mostly carbon, and so to break it down, it does require some nitrogen. So bacteria mostly doesn't break down wood chip. It can't cope with the strong lignin structure. So mostly it's fungi that's breaking down wood chip. And fungi can operate at much lower nitrogen levels than bacteria, but it still needs some nitrogen. So if you've got really, old wood chip from a big old tree, there's going to be very little nitrogen in it. So it does need a bit of nitrogen to start breaking it down. Now, obviously, you get a bit of nitrogen in rainfall, and you can add manure or slurry or something to it to with seaweed liquid to give it some nitrogen. But if you haven't done that, it will try and scavenge nitrogen and find it from somewhere. So if you just rest it on the top of the soil, then it seems as though it will only rob nitrogen from about sort of centimetre of soil where it touches. So if you're just resting on the top, then it's only robbing nitrogen from that top 1 centimetre. And for most plants, trees and everything that have deep roots, that's just not going to be a problem. So as long as you're not digging in fresh wood chip, as soon as you dig it in, obviously, then it's in contact with loads of soil and the sort of surface area of it's much more increased. Or if you compost it first, then you shouldn't get problems. I have had problems with it on raspberries, for instance, which are really shallow rooted, and I think it just was taking a bit too much fertility from that top layer. But I certainly, in most cases that I've used it, I haven't seen those problems that people are afraid of. So I think sort of following a couple of quite basic rules, you can reduce the risk massively. But I think there was a fear of kind of experimentation or using it in anything other than paths because of that. And so even where these pioneers had been showing the possibilities, it hadn't then been taken up. And I guess coinciding perhaps with ready availability of plastic mulches or herbicides, maybe there just wasn't the the demand or the interest to find biological organic solution to all of this.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you bring up fear of stealing nitrogen, where in some of the testimonies in your book, something that really interested me just in the current moment, where farmers are realizing that cheap nitrates are a thing of the past, and are looking to transition, and are people who maybe 2 years ago would definitely not be open to ideas that involve taking agrochemicals out of their system and looking for organic ways. The testimonies in your book are showing how people are using wood chips to decrease or eliminate or just have no need for fertilizers, right?
Almost. I mean, in itself, it's not, it's not a fertilizer, really. I mean, obviously, it's got some nutrient in it. And if you use a lot of it every year, you might actually put too much potassium and phosphorus in your soil, for instance. But generally, I would say you're not using it as a fertilizer. But what it is doing is it's building the soil organic matter. It's building your soil health. It's building soil fungi, which is also able to sequester carbon. So it's just making the best use of the nutrients you've got. Now, if you're also then adding, say, organic manure to it, or you're using it for livestock bedding, then it's making better use of that fertility as well. So one of the studies I found was looking at the leaching, for instance, from wood chip bedding versus straw bedding, and showing that wood chip has reduced leaching, so it effectively holds on to those nutrients better. And there was even one farmer that was adding wood chip to his artificial nitrogen. So he wasn't actually stopping using nitrogen, but it meant that he could put less on because it was holding on to it and slowly releasing it and wasn't sort of getting washed into the watercourses. So I think you've probably got to be careful about seeing it as it's definitely not a replacement for fertilizer, but it is a really good way, I think, of effectively holding on to more of the nutrients you've got in your soil, whether that's something that you're adding or whether it's something that's built up through your legumes and leaves. Because even if you're ploughing, for instance, you've got quite a release of nitrogen when you plough. And having that sort of slightly woody, organic rutted component in your soil will mean that more of that is bound up in the organic matter and less of it is likely just to disappear.
So could wood chips be integrated into like arable systems, or are we just talking gardens, like
Well, no, I think there's massive opportunities to integrate them into farming, and one of the things that sort of really excites me that hasn't been done very much is, you know, looking at how you integrate agroforestry into your system, using the wood chip then to build your soil health. So the Wakelands Agroforestry, for instance, you know, the system they've got there, although at the moment I think most of their wood chip is going in for their biomass boilers, you know, there's no reason why you couldn't harvest it, chip it, and either just add it straight to the alleys in between, which is what we're hoping to do with some of the fields at Eastbrook, or you can take it away and compost it and add it to your vegetable bits. You know, so if you've got some areas of the farm that you're farming more intensively, then you might choose to, you know, move some of that fertility across. But you're not only getting the, you know, the benefit of the wood chip, but you're also getting the benefit of the trees while they're growing. So you're getting the shade and the shelter and the, you know, the higher temperatures if you want them, or, you know, the biodiversity benefits. So it's a way of if it's a way, I think, of producing your own long-term soil health amendments, and sort of coming back to that idea of a holistic farming system. You know, every input that you bring onto your farm is at risk. The more you can
and a cost.
rely on, and a cost, absolutely, yeah.
Well, it's kind of like the whole, you know, Albert Howard theory of law of return.
Yeah,
you're just growing the fertility right on your own plot instead of using fossil fuels to get it there or to produce it.
yeah.
But
and the beauty as well is you can use areas that wouldn't grow other stuff. So again, Ian Tolhurst, for instance, you know, he's got an acre of willow on the wettest bit of his land that gets flood. He can't grow vegetables on that bit, but he's harvesting willow and spreading it on the bits that are then giving him a benefit in terms of yield.
he has some, I know I mess up the statistic, but our growers here at Schumacher column is particularly keen on learning from Ian Tolhurst and his whole theory of, you know, you have 10-acre piece and you use a certain amount of land to just grow for wood chips. And I'm still trying to understand, like, if you're saying the wood chip, yeah, it's great for building soil health and organic matter, but not necessarily going to be good for adding macronutrients to the soil, or maybe phosphorus, but not nitrogen. Where's the missing piece, and how could you do what, you know, Ian is doing, or what is Ian doing? Maybe you can kind of explain.
So what Ian's got is a very long rotation. So he has a fertility building lay where he's not growing vegetables. He also does an awful lot of undersowing. So, you know, his brassicas are all undersown with legumes. His courgettes and squashes are undersown with legumes. So he's got within his something like, I can't remember his rotation now. He's got 2 different rotations. I think in the wall garden it's about an 8 or 11-year rotation or something, and out in the field I think it might be a 6-year rotation. So he's got long rotations and a lot of fertility building within that. So he's not relying on the wood chip for that, but what it does do is it holds on to it and it makes his soil more resilient. And he's been growing for 30 years there. You know, he's been doing, you know, most things right for 30 years. What he says is since he started using wood chip, his whole system has sort of gone up another level in terms of health and productivity. And you know, I've stood with him in a field and we looked down at the soil a month or so after he'd spread some composted wood chip on the soil, and every bit of the soil surface was a worm cast.
Right.
You literally couldn't find a bit of soil that wasn't worm cast, and he's not on the best soil. He's on grade 3B or something. You know, it's not prime growing land, so it is incredible.
Well, that sounds like adding fertility to me. I mean, if you have worm castings, that's.
But it's not. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is it's not just the wood chip. It's part of a system that's working. So, you know, if you've got a rubbish farm, you know, a farming system, and you think adding wood chip is going to solve everything, it won't. But it definitely can be part of. And it, you know, you could probably put slightly higher levels on at the start as a kind of as a boost. And I mean, I'm really interested as well in looking at mixing wood chip with really sort of biologically active compost, for instance. So you kind of getting that benefit of the biology and the carbon matter in the wood chip. I think there's so much research that still needs to be done on this. We're scratching the surface, really, was the other thing that I realized at the end of writing 60,000 words on wood chip, is that we need another 60,000 at least.
Right. And so on the topic of the composting, and making it a component of what you say biologically rich, or catalysts, I guess, but what are the benefits of using composted wood chips to uncomposted wood chips? And I'm talking more about the ramiole, which sound like they're a better bet to put raw onto the soil. But what are the benefits of composting, and could you create a mixture based on the resources you have on hand, because everybody's resources are different, or knowledge you have, to use the wood chip in combination with other materials to create this kind of amazing product? Or how would that look?
I think you could, and again, I think there's so much we don't know, basically. So the project that Organic Research Centre ran, which involved Wakelins and Ian Tolhurst and a non-organic arable farmer in Hampshire, and it involves spreading ramiole wood chip on 2 of the farms, and then on Tolly's farm it was ramiole and composted, and comparing them. And there weren't sort of massive clear benefits in the 2 years of the project, which I think is probably not surprising, but equally we didn't see any detrimental effect either. Even on the arable farm, where they were effectively adding it to bare soil just before a crop, which is, if you were going to see problems, that is probably where you'd see them, and he didn't. And he's definitely building up his soil health in the long term. And Tolly recommends putting it on his, he puts on his fertility building ley, so he doesn't put it directly on the soil, he puts it on the ley, and then that gives time for it to be taken in. So if there were any sort of negative effects, they'd have ironed themselves out by the time you got a crop in. So I think the short answer is we don't know the full benefits. I think the difference, so the advantage of the ramiole wood chip is that you don't have to do anything to it. So normally if you're harvesting wood chip, you've got to put it in a trailer, you've got to take it somewhere, you've got to turn it, you've got to put it back in a trailer, you've got to put it in and spread it, so it's quite labor and potentially fuel intensive to get it anywhere. Whereas if you're just spreading it raw, you can chip it straight onto the soil almost, or pop it in a trailer and spread it immediately. So it reduces the cost and the environmental impact of using it. I think we definitely need to do more research about what it does to the soil and the benefit it does. And again, there might well be differences between different species, and that's another big area of unexplored sort of territory, is single species wood chip. And we've done a little bit with willow, but not much else. The composting, I think, reduces the risk of any negative effect. So we use a lot of wood chip that comes from tree surgeons. We produce some of our own, but we mostly have 3 tree surgeons that come and drop stuff with us, and it's very mixed. It's different species, it's different ages.
Be diseased.
Yeah, some of it probably has disease in. I've become very unconcerned by that. I was a little bit worried at the start, but I'm not so worried anymore. I can explain why. But so we get quite a lot of stuff, and because we're mainly using it for mulching, we don't worry too much, because it can even go on uncomposted. But we do try and mix it up a bit, so you don't get all the green stuff on one tree and all the brown stuff on another. And I think composting has there's a few advantages to composting. Firstly, it does make it more biologically active. So we know that if you can make a good compost, it's got a good it's got a good biology in it. And it's quite interesting looking at some of the bioreactors. So the Johnson-Su bioreactor method, where is static composting effectively, where you either push air through it or let air go through it. And it seems that by not turning it, you get a wider variety of fungal and bacteria in there. So 120 species rather than 80 species, that sort of thing. And it's a bit of a faff to set up, but once you've done it, then you just leave it. And in theory, you get this more biologically rich material. So that's one thing. There's also, as you mentioned, the disease. So if there is any disease in the wood chip, composting will get rid of most of it. And then finally, if there's any, some wood chips have chemicals in them that can be harmful. So things like walnut or some of the sort of cypresses and pines, have oils and things in their needles that, if you put them on fresh, can cause problems. But they seem to mostly break down within 3 to 6 months on the heap. So composting will remove any risk of that. And yeah, as I said, just sort of, if you mix it up, it's balancing the sort of green and brown. The problem is, particularly, fungi doesn't like being disturbed. So every time you turn a wood chip pile, you're breaking up the fungi. So that's, I think, possibly why the static heaps work quite well. But yeah, I definitely don't pretend that we know even a tenth of what's going on in some of this stuff. It's biology. It's complicated.
Yeah. So we really only have about 13 minutes left. So I want to open it up to the audience if people have questions. If not, I have plenty more questions, but just to give people a chance. If I think I should be able to see the questions if anything comes up in the chat.
Yes, you should.
Okay. So please feel free, ask questions. If not, I'm just going to keep hogging. Well, I'll go ahead and ask a question in the meantime. I'm curious about the seed beds, and I know that we're doing it. Oh, how about using the wood chip for biochar?
Yeah, I'm really interested in biochar. I've done a few trials over the years with biochar. There's a few things so one of the things with biochar is you do lose, unless you've got a really, really fancy system, you lose quite a lot of the carbon in the process of making biochar. So if you can get multiple benefits out of that, so if you use the heat, for instance, to heat your propagation house, and then you feed the biochar to your livestock, and then you collect the manure and make a compost from it and propagate your plants, and then it goes into the soil, you've effectively had 4 benefits from that biochar, which then to me would seem to justify that loss of carbon. If you're just burning it, making biochar and putting it into the soil, even though in theory that biochar will last a lot longer, I'm still not convinced it's the answer to all our problems. And I've seen startling effects of biochar in really poor sandy soils, or in propagation, or in tunnels and glass houses where you've got these real extremes of temperature and moisture. But we've done trials on our heavy clay at Eastbrook, and I've seen no benefit at all, as far as I can gather. So I think I am interested in biochar, but it's quite an intensive method of production. And I quite like the fact with wood chip that it's very low tech. It's quite easy. There's not very much that can go wrong with it, and potentially you can just chip it and spread it, and that to me is more likely to be a technology that farmers can use. There are some farmers interested in biochar, but the risk, I think, with biochar is it becomes a technology, it becomes an industry that then gets out of hand potentially, and you then end up driving production for biochar with potential unintended consequences. So. There is a great book, by the way, by Chelsea Green on biochar called Burn, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it.
Ben, can you see the questions?
Yeah, hang on, let me.
So Colin has another question, and then there's another one below it.
Yes, definitely worth weeing in your wood chip. And what was it? At what point, before or after composting? I would probably do it before composting. Effectively, it's actually a nitrogen source, so it will speed up your composting. And yeah, and you can use it in compost toilets really well instead of sawdust as well. It's good. So definitely. What was the other one? How deep do you mulch with wood chip? So good question. 10 to 15 centimeters is the recommended minimum. As with the willow chip experiment, 2.5 feet on willows works quite well. I would say for tree planting, almost as deep as you can. So you've got to be careful for most species not to let it touch the trunk of the tree because it will cause rotting. Although on willow, that obviously wasn't a problem. They'll root all the way up the trunk. So ideally, you just sort of push it away from the tree when you're mulching. If you're using it on vegetable beds, composted wood chip on sort of no-dig vegetables, for instance, then I would say you don't want it too deep. You could probably put it quite deep the first year if you're establishing it, but after that, I would say you just want to sprinkle. So yeah, hope that answers the question. Any others? That looks like that stuff. All for now.
I have a question about using chips for seed beds. And you mentioned before, you're finding that a well composted chip mix could create something that's comparable to peat. And I don't know, maybe you could expand on that a little bit, why that might be important and how that could be potentially taken to scale to eliminate the extraction of peat.
Yeah, so I think most people now, apart from a few dinosaurs, agree that we need to stop using peat. There are some who are calling for an immediate ban of peat, which I think, given the current scale of peat-free replacements, is not possible. I think we could do it relatively quickly if we had the right incentives and the right drive. So at the moment, peat-free alternatives are coir, which in my mind is not the best. I don't think it's the best material necessarily for a lot of crops. Sorry?
What is it called?
So coir, which is the shredded coconut husk.
Oh, right.
So it's very uniform, which is good. It's very free draining, which for some crops is okay, but for a lot of crops is a bit of a problem. So you need to water it a lot and feed it more than usual. It's also, although technically it's a waste product, arguably that waste organic matter should be going back into the soils of the countries that the coconuts are grown in, rather than being shipped
10,000 kilometers away.
Yeah, so I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not, in my mind, it's not the answer to our problems. There are some companies like Melcourt that are using bark and making really good compost, but as far as I don't know how much opportunity they've got to scale up to the levels that would be needed to replace all the current peat use. There's some really interesting compost like the Dalefoot one, which is bracken and sheep's wool, which is a really good product and presumably could be scaled up. There's lots of bracken and lots of sheep. But wood chip is probably even more available than any of those, given, particularly if you can start producing your own and have control over it. So I think there's massive opportunity to use wood chip as a replacement for peat in a lot of circumstances. I mean, the trial we did was only on leeks and brassicas, so it might not work on everything. There might be crops that it's totally unsuited for. So clearly we need to test a much wider range of crops and size of crops and all the rest of it. But the fact that you look at these plants and there really was no difference between them, And interestingly, so there were actually 4 replications in the trial. There was the 2 compost, but then we also added biochar to both of them. So there were sort of 4 different replications. And the only statistical difference we saw in the trial was that the crops, the plants that had wood chip or biochar in ended up with less leek rust out in the field. And again, we're not entirely sure why, possibly just higher biological activity and a slightly healthier plant. I don't know, but that was interesting. So yeah, I think it's underused. I mean, clearly there's a problem at the moment, and a lot of wood chip is going into biomass. I'm going up to see Drax at the end of this week, which uses an awful lot of wood chip. So there's competition for using wood chip, and I've heard in the last couple of years that it's in some areas of the country it's getting harder to get free wood chip from tree surgeons, and some people are now needing to pay to get it. Which is probably
a good thing. Is that a good thing in your?
Yes, I think it probably is. I think some wood chip has been going into landfill, which is just, so wrong. So if there is a value on it, that is a good thing. And a lot of the wood chip that we would use on farms is not the same wood chip that would go into biomass. It can be a lower grade, so it doesn't need to be quite the same quality. Do we want it to become so expensive that people can't use it? I don't know, maybe not, and I'm not sure that burning wood chip for biomass is the answer to our energy solutions either. So, what I would like to see is lots more people growing their own wood chip for use, locally and on farm. So.
That kind of leads to my final question. I'll ask you and then we'll go to Collins, but what would be, your dream in this country, let's just say England, for wood chips? Like what's Ben Raskin's dream for utilizing wood chips? Is it everyone growing a few trees on their property that they're managing? Is it plantations of willow? Is it rewilding using this? What is it?
I don't think I have a vision of that scale. I think it depends an awful lot on each individual situation. I think it's like with agroforestry. Most farms would benefit from some more trees. Most farms would benefit from managing the trees they have already better. Now we don't want to get to a situation where we're taking every last bit of tree out of every woodland and chipping it, because we also need to leave some wood to rot down for soil carbon and biodiversity in the forest. So there's a balance everywhere. But I'm one of the reasons that I now focus a lot of my work on agroforestry is I'm convinced that it's the quickest natural solution to help with climate change. It's clearly not the only answer, but there's so much potential for increasing productivity of farming systems. But knowing what to do with the trees on those farms is really hard. It's only a small proportion that will want to grow a nut crop, or will want to, plant timber for harvesting in 100 years. But actually, almost every farmer could make use of some wood chip around the place. And maybe a bit for their neighborhood or their allotments. Or so I think just more trees and farms, and some of that being used for wood chip to build soil health and all the rest of it. I guess that's my vision. Quite a vague one.
Well, sounds good. Well, we'll take this. We'll take Colin's last question. Can you see it there?
I can. So, is ash wood useful for wood chip? Because there's going to be a lot of it around. Fungal production, ash not considered used for high. Yeah. So, ash is fine for wood chip. I think any wood really is useful for wood chip. And in most situations, I don't think it even matters what the wood chip is. Clearly, if you've got livestock, you've got to be a little bit careful about thorns and poisonous leaves and things. But in most situations, most wood chip is fine. For mulching trees, actually, a harder wood chip can be more useful because it lasts for longer, so you don't have to spread it so often. there's with the disease thing, I sometimes get asked, should we be using ash because of all the ash dieback? Well, actually, the fungal spores are mostly not carried in wood chip, and mostly everywhere anyway, or on the leaves, or so while I probably wouldn't mulch a newly planted ash plantation with old ash wood chip, in most other situations I think it's fine. And actually these diseases, apart from things like ash, they mostly ash dieback, they mostly attack weak and dying trees anyway. Most diseases don't go for young, vigorous, new seedlings that saplings that you just planted. So yeah, I mean, if you've got access to ash wood chip, I would use it. Obviously
seems to be definitely a lot around, especially in certain places in the country. I was in the Cotswolds a couple weeks ago, and it was heartbreaking to see whole hillsides dead.
Yeah.
So hopefully it can get utilized for, feeding other organisms. And
exactly.
Great. Well, just curious if there's anything else you wanted to say personally.
I don't think so. No, just thank you all for listening. Those of you that managed to get through.
Yeah. Sorry to cut it a little bit short, but I really appreciate you joining us, and definitely hope to see you here in person sometime pretty soon. If not, I'd love to come and visit you at your project there in near Swindon, and wish you the best on the next book.
Well, I have got another one coming out in the autumn on trees. Yes. On trees. Yeah.
What you want to give us a little hint, or?
It's retree the world, trying to plant. So it's kind of just about a bit about why trees are so wonderful, and some little profiles of trees. So it's not a Chelsea Green one, but it's and I am working on a couple of ideas for some more Chelsea Green ones as well. So.
Wow. And how do you find time to write? Other like high profile jobs and.
Well, yeah, I work part time on the other ones, and I quite enjoy writing. It's a sort of release, to some extent. It's my creative time. It's what early mornings and weekends are for.
Okay, so it's like in your free time, basically.
Basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Great to hear. Inspiring. Wonderful. Well, thanks everyone who joined us. Thank you, Ben. And
thank you, Nathan.
You're very welcome. Yeah, it's my pleasure. And many thanks to everyone. Ben, have an excellent night. I hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Nathan. It's a pleasure. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.